there's been a lot of focus on the top end lately in some of our national debate, whether indeed it is the gas policies that were announced by the government yesterday, which could lead to gas reservation on future projects, big deal here in the Northern Territory, whether indeed it's the idea of the US basing some mid-range missiles somewhere in the region, won't be here in the top end, we're told, but also the concerns about that thing over my shoulder, the Port of Darwin. This week we saw one Labor backbencher suggest it should be nationalised, and pretty much broad bipartisan agreement that it was a bad idea to sell this, to at least lease it for 99 years to the Chinese company Landbridge some years ago. Here was Anthony Albanese, the Labor leader, on that today.
The Port of Darwin, when it was sold, I was the Shadow Transport Minister. I think that was a very bad decision that the government made, but it's a decision that has been made. We do care in this country about issues of sovereign risk, and the government, at a time where they talk about protection of our borders and a whole range of issues, the fact they sold off our northernmost port, which is a very strategic asset, I believe that should have been maintained in public hands, let alone not, as well as obviously kept in Australian hands.
So are the concerns over this port, the Port of Darwin, well-founded? Are they legitimate? Is there a case for actually seizing control of it back from the Chinese company Landbridge? Well, coming up very shortly, I'm going to be talking to someone who was, well, instrumental in pushing for the sale to actually take place. And we'll look at what it actually does now, what developments happened there, and whether this is a legitimate security concern or not. I mentioned the idea of US missiles, mid-range missiles being based in the region. You may recall earlier in the week the Prime Minister pretty quickly, well, in fact, it did take an extra day, but pretty firmly said no, this was not something that was about to be happening. It was not even something the government would consider. It all stemmed from some comments from the newish US Defence Secretary Mark Esper. He was on his way here to Australia for the AUSMIN talks that took place over the weekend with Australian and American defence and foreign ministers. Mark Esper talked about the US plans to station some intermediate-range missiles in the region. Well, yesterday, China hit back, said this would be viewed as an offensive move from the US and that China would respond. Well, just in the last little while, Mark Esper, the Defence Secretary, has absolutely walked this back. He's now saying, I'm not suggesting the missiles would be based in the region anytime soon.
I have never asked anybody about the deployment of missiles in Asia. So what was reported about with us and the Australians was, I never asked, they never declined. We are quite some ways away from that. It's going to take, again, a few years to actually have some type of initial operational capable missiles, whether they are ballistic, cruise, you name it, to be able to deploy. And that's between now and then. There's going to be a lot of dialogue. Again, somehow this got spun along to a point where I guess some people thought we were deploying missiles next week or something like that. So, anyways, does that clarify?
So these American missiles won't be here in the top end. They won't be anywhere, it seems, for quite some time. We're talking next generation. Down the track, trying to hose that one down. There are plenty of other spot fires between the US and China right now on the trade front, which we'll get to as well, of course, this afternoon, without having to worry about escalating an arms race even further. But you don't come to Darwin without talking to Matt Cunningham, who joins me here. Great to see you, and great to be here this week rather than very, very chilly Canberra. I can tell you it's lovely. Look, just picking up on a couple of things there. Gas. Yesterday, the Morrison government announced a number of things, including plans to introduce some sort of gas reservation policy, but only on future projects. And of course, the big future project that not just here in the Territory, but all Australians are looking at is this Beetaloo Basin project in the Territory. How big a deal is this for the Territory, and what would the prospect of a gas reservation policy mean for that project?
Well, it's an enormous, it has enormous potential, there's no doubt about that. When you talk about the amount of gas in the Beetaloo Basin, the estimates at one level are at 500 trillion cubic feet. We're talking about enough gas to supply Australia's domestic energy market for 200, 300, 400 years. So, it's an enormous potential amount of gas that's there. Obviously, the exploration is only just beginning now. The Northern Territory government here, when they came to power in 2016, put a moratorium in place. That was lifted only last year, and only now is that exploration beginning again. As for the domestic gas reservation policy, I think that the gas companies will have some concern over that.
They hate the idea.
Yeah, I think that's probably a fair assessment. Although, you know, from Australia's point of view, from Darwin's point of view, there may be some benefits to it. If you go back to...
cheap gas for what? Manufacturing for household use here as well wouldn't be a bad thing.
Well, absolutely, and one of the things that you know successive governments here in the Northern Territory have spoken about is setting up Darwin as a manufacturing hub. So you know having these manufacturing businesses that might be based down south at the moment, based up here in Darwin, so that they're closer to that gas, the cost of the transport is lower, and that they can get some development going up here, and of course importantly some population increase up here, because that's the thing that's been killing the Northern Territory over the past few years, particularly with the wind down of the Impex gas project.
Yeah, but you've got to get the actual gas development to go ahead, so the numbers have to stack up for those private companies to do it, and you know, if there's a gas reservation policy that changes the equation for them, then I suppose nothing happens. The Port of Darwin, Nick Champion, you would have seen this week saying the government should nationalise it. We just heard Anthony Albanese, and effectively Scott Morrison the other day as well, saying it wasn't a great idea to sell this to the Chinese company Landbridge, but a bit hard to unscramble the egg now. Just give me a sense of the local attitude towards this port and the local government's attitude towards it.
Well, I think at first there was some concern, primarily because it was something that came out of the blue at the time. Certainly, you know, people here didn't know much about it before that deal was done to lease the port. I think that wasn't helped by, you know, those comments that Barack Obama made to Malcolm Turnbull when they met, when he said, you know, next time let us know, although...
Yeah, he was furious about that.
I'm not sure that the Americans weren't let know about this. It went to the Foreign Investment Review Board. My understanding is that the Americans were told about it, but perhaps Barack Obama didn't actually know at the time when he made those comments to Malcolm Turnbull. As for the feeling on the ground here, I think people... have certainly gotten used to the idea of having Landbridge here. I think Landbridge has put a lot of money back into the local community. They're spending $200 million building a 6-star luxury hotel down near the port. And when you consider that there's so little investment happening in this part of the world at the moment, I think people are, you know, welcoming, you know, the potential investment. There are those concerns, you know, those security concerns, but I think that most people here in Darwin, including the current government, which you know, criticised the CLP when they did that deal back in 2015, have come on board with Landbridge and think that the benefits outweigh the negatives at this stage.
I'm going to come back to that issue in a moment. You've just come back, Matt, from the Garma Festival over in northeast Arnhem Land. A lot of focus there on recognition, having a voice in the Constitution. You spoke to all the key players who were there. What's your sense, you've been to a few of these, what's your sense of progress that was made there? Are we still importantly seeing a united view and approach on this amongst the Indigenous leadership?
Oh, look, broadly I think yes, but I think there's going to be a very long road to hoe on this issue if that question is going to be put to the Australian public, and it's going to include a voice to Parliament. Ken Wyatt, I think, was very careful while he was there to keep expectations sort of suppressed at some level. He made the point that a lot of people, and Pat Dodson, I think, made this same point to you last year after that report was done by the Joint Select Committee, that a lot of Aboriginal people probably don't have a great understanding at the moment of what is meant by the voice, that in sort of media and political circles it sort of carries great weight.
A lot of detail has not been worked out. I mean, let's be clear, you know, how it would actually be constituted, what specifically it would do, all of these things.
Exactly, and I thought that was interesting from Anthony Albanese saying, yes, we want to see it enshrined in the Constitution, and then the Parliament will have control to sort of alter it or change it if they don't know how it works. I'm not sure how well that's going to fly. The other interesting question, I think, is whether Labor will still support constitutional recognition if a question's put to the Australian public but it doesn't include the voice to Parliament. Will Labor then still support it? I'm hearing already people within some of the Indigenous groups saying that if that question goes to the Australian public but doesn't include a voice to Parliament, they'll actively campaign against it. So I think you're already seeing a situation similar to the Republic debate that we saw in 1999, where there is that fracturing even amongst those who broadly support constitutional recognition.